Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first week of a 5-week course on emotional self-care and recovery. I am so happy that you're here today, whether you're watching this live, catching the replay later, or fitting it in sometime this week when the house is finally quiet. My name is Sheila, and as most of you already know, I created this course specifically for our community, people who are doing the hard, courageous work of recovering from processed food obsession while also navigating chronic illness and aiming for lasting remission. This journey we're on together isn't easy. Many of us have spent years feeling hijacked by cravings, exhausted by symptoms that flare without warning, and frustrated by how intertwined our emotional world is with both the addiction and maybe a chronic illness. So today we're starting something different. We're starting with understanding, clear, grounded, science-backed understanding before we ever jump into tools or exercises. This first session is about 40 minutes long, depending on how slowly I talk when I get excited about the research, which happens a lot. You don't need to scribble notes frantically. This recording will always be available. If something lands for you, feel free to pause. Jot it down. So let's begin. Let's take a look at our opening slide. It's simple. It's straightforward. The white heart sitting on the dark stones is deliberate. It's a visual reminder that caring for ourselves emotionally isn't fluffy or optional. It's foundational. Like the heart resting on something solid, emotional self-care becomes the stable base we build everything else on. Stable eating, better symptom management, more energy for the life that we actually want. Today is purely orientation. Think of it as getting the map before we start the hike. We're not fixing anything yet. We're not learning breathing techniques or journaling prompts. We're answering three big questions. What actually are emotions from a brain and body perspective? Why do they matter so much in processed food addiction recovery or in chronic illness remission? What emotional self-care really is, and just as importantly, what it is not. By the end of today, you'll have a clear framework for what makes the rest of the course make sense. You'll also, I hope, feel a little less alone in how intense emotions can feel when you're in this particular double challenge of addiction recovery plus chronic illness remission. Let's move to the big picture. I want you to see the whole path of the course right from the start because it's designed very intentionally. We have 5 progressive layers, and each one builds brand new capacities on top of the ones before it. Each week adds something you literally could not do effectively without the prior layers. Layer 1 today is orientation and framework. Layer 1 today is orientation and framework. We're laying the conceptual groundwork. Layer 2 next week is internal awareness. We finally start making direct, non-judgmental contact with emotional experience in the body and mind. Layer 3 is internal regulation. This is where we learn to work skillfully with emotional activation when it starts to escalate. Layer 4 is relational regulation. Once we have some internal stability, we look at how relationships with others and with ourselves shape emotional experience. Layer 5 is advanced application under pressure. This is integration, using everything when the stakes are highest. Cravings, symptom flares, stressful life events. Why this stepwise design? Because research on skill acquisition, whether it's motor skills, cognitive skills, or emotional skills, consistently shows that layered progressive training leads to deeper learning and better real-world transfer. Studies on dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, and emotion-focused interventions for addiction use this exact staged approach for a reason, trying to teach advanced regulation before basic awareness leads to frustration and dropout. We're doing the opposite, setting you up to succeed long term. Take a breath and just notice how that feels. Some of you might feel relief. Finally, something starts at the beginning. Others might feel impatient. I just want tools now. Both are completely valid. Wherever you are is perfect because this structure honors that emotions are complex and building real skill takes time. Okay, let's get into the science of what emotions actually are. Most of us use the word emotion casually. I'm feeling emotional today. But when we zoom in, emotions are multifaceted, whole system responses. They involve at least four components. First, physiological changes. Your heart rate might speed up, blood pressure rises, muscles tense. Stress hormones like cortisol or adrenaline surge. Breathing patterns change. In chronic illness, many of us already live with heightened baseline physiology, so emotional shifts can feel extra intense. Second, subjective feelings. This is the personal qualitative experience, what it feels like part that only you have access to. Third, behavioral urges. Emotions push us toward action. Anger prepares us to fight or set boundaries. Fear prepares us to freeze or flee. Sadness pulls us toward withdrawal or seeking comfort. In processed food addiction, those comfort-seeking urges can get routed straight into cravings. Fourth, key brain regions are involved. The amygdala acts as a rapid detector of potential threat or reward. It's fast and it's often automatic. The prefrontal cortex interprets the signal, adds context, and helps regulate response. The insula connects bodily sensations to emotional meaning. Think of it as a bridge between my stomach is tight and I feel anxious. From an evolutionary perspective, emotions developed as adaptive survival signals. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, quick fear saved lives from predators. Quick disgust prevented poisoning. Joy and affection strengthened social bonds critical for group survival. These systems are still running in us today. But in modern life, especially with ultra-processed foods engineered to hyperstimulate reward circuits and chronic illnesses that keep the stress system chronically activated, these ancient signals can feel overwhelming or misleading. fMRI research on individuals with substance and behavioral addictions shows heightened amygdala reactivity and sometimes reduced prefrontal regulation capacity. The system is doing what it evolved to do. It's just doing it in an environment that wasn't designed to. So when you feel a wave of irritability followed by an intense craving after a difficult medical appointment, that's not you being weak. That's a very human neurophysiological response under load. Let me pause here for a moment. If any of this is resonating in your body right now, just notice it. No need to change anything. We're just mapping territory. Here's where we start a crucial mindset shift. Emotions are messengers. They alert us to needs, values, threats, or opportunities. Here are some common examples. Anger often signals a boundary violation or injustice. Maybe someone minimized your dietary needs at a family gathering. Sadness signals loss or need for connection. Perhaps grief over activities chronic illness took away. Anxiety flags potential threat, uncertainty about test results, or whether symptoms will flare. Shame signals a perceived threat to social standing, common in addiction when we feel, I should have more willpower by now. A powerful piece of research called affect labeling shows that simply naming an emotion accurately reduces its intensity. In one well-known UCLA study, participants shown upsetting images had less amygdala activation when they labeled the emotion, angry, afraid, versus when they didn't. Naming turns down the physiological volume. In recovery and chronic illness context, emotional signals are often amplified. Higher baseline stress, altered neurotransmitter balance, inflammation affecting brain function. But they are still valid data. They're trying to tell you something useful, even when the volume feels too loud. So many of us learned early on to treat emotions as problems to solve. Eat over them, distract from them, shame ourselves for having them. But when we start seeing them as signals instead, something shifts. We move from fighting the messenger to listening to the message. Think about a recent craving. If you trace it backward, there was almost always an emotional signal first. Boredom signaling need for engagement. Loneliness signaling need for connection. Frustration signaling need for agency. The food became the detour around the signal instead of addressing the underlying need. We're not judging that detour today. We're just noticing the pattern so we can eventually choose differently. Now let's connect this directly to our lived experience. In processed food addiction, negative emotional states are one of the strongest triggers for cravings. Neuroimaging studies show that stress and negative affect increase activity in brain reward centers, making hyper-palatable foods even more salient. The cycle is emotional distress, leading to temporary dopamine and opioid surge from eating, leading to short-term relief, leading to reinforcement of the neural pathway, leading to stronger future cravings when similar emotions arise. In chronic illness, chronic stress and negative emotions have measurable effects on symptoms. Psychoneuroimmunology research demonstrates that prolonged stress hormones suppress immune function, increase systemic inflammation, and can worsen pain sensitivity. Grief, frustration, fear of the future, all common in chronic illness, are not just psychological. They have physiological downstream effects. When both conditions overlap, as they so often do in our community, the emotional load is compounded. Unprocessed emotions keep both the addiction cycle and symptom cycles spinning. Conversely, interventions that improve emotional regulation skills show measurable benefits. Meta-analyses of mindfulness-based relapse prevention programs, DBT for addiction, and emotional awareness training in pain management all point to the same conclusion. Higher emotional skill correlates with lower relapse rates, fewer binge episodes, better adherence to health behaviors, and in some cases, improved biomarkers of inflammation. Emotional self-care isn't a nice add-on. It's a core lever for changing outcomes. I want to say that again. The research says that building these internal capacities gives you a genuine advantage in both recovery and remission. It's not about being more positive. It's about having more internal choice when the system is activated. Before we define what it is, let's clear the deck of common misconceptions. Emotional self-care is not just coping. Coping mechanisms are moment-to-moment strategies. Taking a walk, calling a friend, using a breathing app. Those are really helpful, but they're tactical, not foundational. It is not suppression. Research on expressive suppression shows it increases sympathetic nervous system activation over time and is associated with higher relapse risk in addiction populations. Pushing feelings down doesn't make them go away. It often makes them louder later. And it is most definitely not forced or toxic positivity. Telling yourself just think positive or everything happens for a reason when you're in real pain can increase internal shame and isolation. Studies on enforced positive thinking in chronic illness populations sometimes show worse mental health outcomes because the approach invalidates legitimate emotional signals. These missteps often backfire because they bypass the signal instead of working with it. Many of us have tried one or all of these approaches and felt worse. That's not a personal failing. It's a mismatch between the strategy and how human emotion actually works. So, what is emotional self-care then? Emotional self-care is a learnable set of internal skills that includes accurate awareness of emotional states in real time, tolerance for experiencing the full range of emotions without immediate escape, skillful regulation of emotional intensity, wise, values-based response rather than reflexive reaction, and proactive building of emotional capacity over time. These skills allow us to meet underlying emotional needs directly without detouring into addictive behaviors or other harmful escapes. The research base is robust. Emotional intelligence models, polyvagal informed work, Third wave CBT approaches like ACT and DBT, they all show that training these internal capacities leads to reduced impulsivity, lower emotional eating, and better health self-management. It's internal work, not external behavior management. And crucially, it's progressive. You can get better at it with deliberate practice, just like any other skill. Imagine noticing rising frustration after a symptom flare, staying present with it long enough to identify the underlying need, maybe rest or validation, and then choosing a response that actually meets that need without reaching for the processed food that would give the minutes of relief, but would be followed by hours of regret and inflammation. That's the long-term vision this course is moving toward, one layer at a time. Here are the core concepts we're introducing today. We're only defining them conceptually, no practice yet. The first is emotional self-awareness, the ability to notice emotions as they arise in real time, without immediate judgment or reaction. The second is identifying emotions, accurately naming what you're feeling. As we've seen, naming alone reduces physiological intensity. Number three, strengthening awareness and control. Developing the capacity to observe emotions with some degree of choice rather than being swept away by them. Number four, recognizing emotional triggers. Becoming aware of the specific internal or external cues that reliably spark emotional responses. Five, identifying emotional needs. Beginning to translate emotional signals into the underlying needs that they point to: rest, connection, autonomy, safety, etc. These five concepts form the foundation. In later weeks, we'll turn them into lived skills. But today, we're just getting familiar with the vocabulary and the why. In our context, emotional triggers might include seeing certain foods advertised, receiving ambiguous medical results, or feeling left out at social events. The corresponding needs might be comfort, certainty, or belonging. Mapping this territory is the first step toward new choices. Let's wrap up today with the key takeaways. We've laid a strong conceptual foundation today. You now understand emotions are multifaceted, evolved survival signals involving body, brain, and behavior. They function as messengers about needs and values, not as problems to eliminate. In processed food addiction and chronic illness, these signals are often amplified but remain valid and useful data. Emotional self-care is a learnable, internal skill set. Awareness, tolerance, regulation, wise response that supports recovery and remission outcomes. It is distinctly not coping mechanisms, suppression, or force positivity. Next week, we move into layer 2, building emotional awareness. That's where awareness shifts from intellectual understanding to direct experiential contact. And finally, I want to acknowledge something very important. Simply showing up today, watching or listening to this material is already an act of self-care. Research on self-directed learning and intrinsic motivation shows that taking intentional steps toward growth, even conceptual ones, strengthens neural pathways for change. So give yourself credit. You're here, you're learning, you're investing in the version of yourself who has more internal freedom around food and health. This is a win. If something from today sparked insight, curiosity, or even discomfort, feel free to share it in the comments. We learn from each other's reflections. Thank you for spending this time with me today. I'll see you next week for week 2, where we start gently moving toward emotional experience itself. Take good care until then.